And so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Menee Yücel is the Senior Vice President, and she's Senior Research Advisor at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. She's an expert on regional and energy issues, publishing numerous articles on energy and regional growth. She's president of the National Association for Business Economics, and she serves on the board of the Global Interdependent Center in the University of Texas at Dallas Energy Board. She was president of the International Association of Energy Economics in 2011, the president of the United States Association of Energy Economics in 2005, and she served on the executive boards of those organizations. Prior to joining the bank in 1989, she was an assistant professor of economics at Louisiana State University. She has a BS and MS from Bogazici University. I'll let you, okay. University in Istanbul, Turkey, and a PhD in economics from the University of Houston. So, Rice in Houston. Rice in Houston. Thank you. I got both universities wrong, but close enough. You didn't come here just to learn where she went to school. You probably came here to find out what she's got to say. Menee, would you come up and share some thoughts with you?
That way. Okay.
Please.
All right. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you for doing this.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to give you a brief update on the Texas economy to start us off and sort of set the stage. Let's see if I can make this work. PhDs, and technology don't necessarily go well together. Okay, so this is the usual disclaimer. The views that I have here are mine and not the Fed's. Okay, so after 2 years of slow growth in 2015 and 2016 following the oil bust, we got back into gear in 2017. And last year, employment growth was the fastest since 2014. We added about 267,000 jobs and grew 2.4%. Now, this is year to date because it's through November. The December numbers are going to come out right now, actually, after we finish. So I think it'll be a little bit slower than the average 2.4, but we'll get it about 10 o'clock or so. So the labor market is really, really tight. The November unemployment rate was 3.7, and that's the lowest that we've had since 1970. Last year, the goods-producing sectors were very strong. But we did see a downshifting toward the end of the year, especially not only goods, but also in services in the fourth quarter. Now, last year, global growth was really strong. Oil prices averaged about $65 per barrel, although they sort of declined to the low 50s in the fourth quarter. So we had a good year. This year, we think 2019 is going to be a bit slower than last year. The reasons are tight labor market, lower oil prices, and slower global growth. In addition, there's a lot of uncertainty out there, both regionally and nationally, and this is affecting decision-making, investment, and hiring decisions among firms. So our forecast for job growth for this year is between 1% and 2%. If you want a point estimate, it's actually about 1.5%, given what we know with the data that we have right now. So we do update it as we go forward. So what you see here is Texas and US growth rates year over year on employment growth, and we usually do better, in general, do better than the nation. And you can see that there, the red is US, blue is Texas. Until 2015, we were doing better than the US. With the oil bust, of course, we sort of slowed, but we came back again, as I said, in 2017, 2018, and I can't really see the numbers now, but I think it's, 2.1 versus 1.5. In 2017, and then this year, 2.4 for Texas versus 1.8 for the nation. Here, this is major Texas metros. Again, this is annual growth starting in 2016, and the 2018 is, again, through November, year to date. And you can see that the energy metros actually did really well last year and sort of came back. You see Houston, and then Corpus Christi, that's petrochemicals. Austin is actually, after Corpus, the fastest growing city in the state. Fort Worth is doing quite well because of the logistics industry, and Dallas slowed last year because Dallas was really growing very fast due to relocations of major businesses into Dallas in 2016, 2017. So that sort of has grown. That growth has slowed, and the labor market is very, very tight. Now, which industries are growing? If you look at by industry, the way I have this is they're ranked, or in terms of the share of their share in Texas employment. So the largest is trade, transportation, and utilities, 20% of Texas employment, all the way down to oil and gas and information. And so overall Texas growth was 2.4%, as I said. The goods sector, that's manufacturing, construction, and oil and gas, was 4.6%, so almost double that. And in the goods sector, the fastest growing was energy, about 9%. But that energy industry is actually really small in terms of share. It's about 2%, so that added about 18,000 jobs last year. Then we have construction, 4.1% added about 28,000 jobs. Manufacturing added about 28,000 jobs. The services sector was slower growing, grew about as fast as the state, 2.4%. And the fastest growing sector was professional business services, and that's 4.4%, added about 68,000 jobs. And that's a pretty large sector, about 14% of total Texas employment. I don't have a picture for Austin, but I can tell you for Austin, construction was booming here, 7.5% growth, followed by education and health, and professional and business services. Now, Texas grows. One reason for Texas's growth is because we have strong in-migration to the state. This is both domestic and international. So in 2018, in the 12 months ending in July, we had a total of 188,000 people coming into Texas, and these are net. About 83,000 of these were domestic from other states, and 105 was international. Now, Texas is also, though, a top importer of jobs and businesses from the rest of the US. So what you're seeing here are the jobs from companies that have relocated to Texas from other states. And we are the #1 importer of jobs from the rest of the country. Now, I have to say, there's a caveat here. This is lag data because the data only goes through 2013. So this is a study that we did at the Dallas Fed, and which shows that we have been the largest recipient of jobs, and California has been the state that has exported the most jobs. Now, 2 points to make about this. This is a long-term trend, and the reason Texas is a favorite destination for companies is our traditional strengths: favorable business climate, central location, large size, accessibility to ports, diverse industrial structure, and abundant energy resources. So those are what draws firms to Texas. One other point to note here, though, is that actually the number of jobs from these relocations isn't that large. So you see 100,000 there from 2000 to 2013. So in terms of our total growth of Texas in those years, it's only about 1.5% of total jobs. So all these incentives that we give to firms to come here, that's great, but it's not too much. It's a pretty small percentage of total jobs created in the state. Okay, and this shows you where those companies are coming from. And California leads, and then we have Louisiana, Oklahoma, and South Carolina. Okay, so as you may know, the Dallas Fed does a services survey and a manufacturing survey every year. And what you're seeing here are the headline indexes from those surveys. So for manufacturing, it's production, and from the service survey, it's revenues. And what you're seeing is there's a huge dip in both of those in the last couple of months. Both of them have declined noticeably. Now, these are diffusion indexes, so they're above 0, which means these sectors are still expanding, but at a much lower rate than they were earlier in the year. So what's the source of weakness? We did a little impromptu survey, just called people from our surveys to say, hey, this is for manufacturing. why is growth slowing? What do you see? And here's what they said. We asked for the top reasons, and this is what we got. Increasing uncertainty is causing customers to reduce orders. Tariffs are hurting domestic demand through higher input costs and prices. Weaker global economy is hurting demand, and labor constraints are limiting production capacity. Okay, so I'm going to go to a little bit detail for the sectors. Housing. So the housing sector has weakened. And what you're seeing here are the indicators that we look at for new housing. So you have permits and starts. And we're seeing a weakening in all of these indicators. The single-family permits had been sort of trending up pretty slowly, but they turned down in July and now are about 3% less than what they were a year ago. On the demand side, house prices are quite high. In fact, house prices, well, I'll talk about that in the next slide, but they're sort of at record highs. So affordability is low, which sort of affects the demand for housing. And of course, mortgage rates have also gone up. So at the margin, that makes a difference. It has a negative effect. On the supply side, development costs are very high. So what land costs are high, so what contacts are telling us is the deals are not making anymore. The numbers aren't making as much sense. And of course, labor constraints have added to labor costs. So we have both supply and demand factors. Looking at the multifamily permits, you see that they sort of took a huge dip down. They are down about 43% year over year. And the reason for that is we built a lot of apartments. So basically, this is just sort of a natural slowing after that. We're seeing a slowing in the sector. The housing starts, it says single family, but that's wrong. It's actually both single family and multifamily because we don't have separate starts. But that is also down about 16% year over year. And we think that's really is being driven by multifamily. Speaking of home prices, here you see home prices in the major metros. And so you see that Houston has been the weakest since the oil bust. Dallas has been the strongest, but it's all coming down. In fact, Dallas, house price appreciation turned negative in November. For Texas, year over year in real terms is about 1.6% appreciation in November. And the median house price was $235,000. So that's still a record high for Texas. For Austin, Austin's appreciation also slowed in November, but it has the highest median house price, $308,000 in November. And inventories are really, really low at 2.8 months of supply. Now looking at affordability, this is an affordability index from Wells Fargo. And basically what it is the share of homes sold in the area that would have been affordable to a family earning local median income. And so the least affordable city is Dallas, followed by Austin. In Austin, about 54.5 of area homes were affordable to a household with median income. And the median income in Austin is $86,000. Okay, I think I'm going to get some water. So I'm an energy economist, so I have to talk about energy. I could talk about energy all day. So as you probably heard, the US surpassed Russia last year to become the world's largest oil producer. Russia is number 2, and the Saudis are number 3. Now, the Saudis have a lot of excess capacity, so they could actually turn on the taps and produce quite a bit more, but right now, this is where we are. And oil production at the end of last year was about 11.6 million barrels per day. That's for US. Now, a lot of this comes from Texas. About 44% of this comes from Texas. And what you're seeing here is the rig count and Texas output. So Texas output in October, and these are the monthly numbers that are reliable, it was 4.7 million barrels per day. But we do have weekly estimates, and they're not as reliable, but you see the weekly estimate there, 5.1 million barrels per day. So that's a lot of oil coming out of Texas. And actually, if Texas were a country, I think After Saudi, we would be the 4th largest producer in the world. So now, but looking at this number, it says that Texas output grew about 1 million barrels per day last year. So, so you might say, well, what's going on? Because the rig count isn't going up. How come output is going up with no rig count increase? Well, one thing is these rigs are really productive. They're very efficient, so you can drill a lot of wells with one rig. And then we have this pad drilling, so you can do that quite fast. The other thing is we could also, even if we didn't drill at all, we could still be producing because we could frack the wells that are drilled already but have not been fracked yet. So these are drilled but uncompleted wells. They're called DUCs. So we have a lot of DUCs in Texas, about 5,800 DUCs. 5,600 DUCs, sorry. So there's a lot of oil that we could get even with no drilling. So that's why you see output going up. But in 2019, we don't think output is going to be going up by 1 million barrels per day in Texas. And the reasons for that are, last year, of course, we had a boom, so we have a lot of constraints in the oil field. We have very tight labor markets in the oil field. We have cost inflation, and we also have pipeline takeaway capacity that's not quite enough. This has been alleviated a little bit, but still, our contacts are telling us until 2020, we're going to see some problems. So we'll have to see. Plus, oil prices are lower. And we'll see where we end up with that this year. And one other thing is, so the number one issue is pipeline capacity, but the other issue is for pipelines, especially the steel tariffs have been quite hurtful because it has raised costs for them. And for some of these pipelines, the only place they can get the pipe is actually China. So it has really raised the costs. So we have a survey, energy survey that's quarterly, and we ask about business activity, capital expenditures, and so on. And what you see here are the 4 quarters of last year, some of these indexes that we create. And I would point out that business activity in the 4th quarter is about down to 0. That's the first set of bars here, you see that. And then if you look at company outlook, in the 4th quarter, looking forward, it turned negative for the first time since the 1st quarter of 2016. Now, we also have this uncertainty index, and that's really gone up incredibly in the 4th quarter. And one last thing is if you look at what people think the price is going to be in 2019, they were saying $60 in the 4th quarter of last year for 2019. Now, with the survey, we also asked some special questions. And one special question that we ask every 1st quarter is this one, which is break-even prices, which is what WTI price does your firm need to profitably drill a new well? And this is what you get from the different basins. And you can see, so the average is that black line, but for every basin, there's a range of what that break-even price is. So for the Permian, in the Midland Basin, for example, it goes from like $20 to $70. So what this tells you is that if you have a price of 70 or 65, everybody is happy. They can drill, and they're making money. $50, not so much. And then if you talk to people, $45, sustained $45, they think we're going to see some bankruptcies. We could see some bankruptcies in the oil patch. Okay, and one final slide before I finish up, and that is exports. So our exports have been growing trends despite the fact that the dollar is quite strong. Because usually when the dollar is strong, Texas exports become expensive, demand for them falls, and exports fall. But you're seeing here that dollar going up and exports going up. What it is, these are mostly energy-related exports. So what happened is with the removal of the crude oil export ban, we started exporting a lot of crude oil, and we're also exporting a lot of refined products such as gasoline and diesel and petrochemicals. So on average, Texas exports through the 3rd quarter grew about 8%. Oil and gas exports grew 108%. Refined products, 32%, that's gasoline and diesel, chemicals, 25%. So it's the energy products that are actually pushing or driving this growth in exports. Now, there were 2 other sectors that were positive, but the rest of the sectors, export sectors, were either negative or flat. And you have to remember that this doesn't show up here, but in the 4th quarter, our exports to China declined to about 0. And so that's going to affect us, fourth quarter numbers, as we go forward. And plus, the global economy is slowing, so that is also going to lower our exports in 2019. Okay, so I'm going to sum up to say last year we had the fastest job growth since 2014, and unemployment rate was at a record low. We expect the growth in 2019 to be a bit slower, and the risks are Dean talked about them, but everybody knows global growth is going to be slower, lower oil prices, a very tight labor market, and I will again say continued uncertainty. There is an global uncertainty index that is now at a level that's higher than where it was during the Great Recession. So global uncertainty is very high. It is bad for business decision making. So again, given all that we know, our forecast, as I said, is between 1% to 2%. The point estimate at the moment is about 1.5%. So it's, there are some clouds on the horizon, but we're still seeing some growth. It's not as great as it was in 2018, but still, I'd say modest growth for Texas in 2019. So I leave you with that, and thank you.
Monet. Just a quick reminder before I invite up our next speaker that your questions, we will be collecting your questions. I believe there are cards around, and is that right, yeah. Christine? All right. And we will collect those cards by the time we get to Q&A. So it's my delight to introduce our next speaker, Erin Nelson. Erin is an alumna of the McCombs School of Business. She is also the CEO and a director of CSDC Systems. She has been a chief marketing officer, held that role for a number of years across a wide range of industries and an impressive group of companies, including Dell, Bazaarvoice, and SunPower. Prior to her time as CMO, she spent 3 years in Europe as the GM of the EMEA business at Dell.com. That was a $3 billion in revenue business, and then later as VP of Marketing for EMEA. Prior to her expat roles, she led a sales organization in the public sector, $1.4 billion. So there's a lot of zeros in these numbers. And led the consumer marketing growth strategy, which drove that business from number 4 to number 1 in just 2 years. She serves, as I said, as a director of CSDC, an advisor to venture-backed social startup Rivet, and she's an advisor on the Dean's Advisory Council at the McCombs School of Business. So please welcome Erin Nelson. Have fun.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm going to get water, too. It is a delight to be back on campus today, especially in this gorgeous facility. I might have stayed in school and really heard our 5-year or 4-year acceptance or exit rates had it been this good when I was here. I'm delighted to talk to you actually about a revolution that is underway. And the revolution that I'm talking about is in the government. Now, luckily for you, I'm not talking about politics today, because I don't think anybody wants to talk about that. I'm talking about a technology-led revolution. As you just heard Monet describe, look at the growth that's happening in the economy, in influx, in housing, in starts. These are all actually causing cities to have to expand their capabilities, to expand what they do for citizens, to expand their efficiency. And I'm going to talk to you about how technology is at the heart of that and driving some really great change. You know, there's a phrase that you've likely heard that is, it's good enough for government. Typically, governments have been viewed as sleepy, behind, slow, not technologically advanced. I'm going to show you where you're going to see that state and local governments are turning that on its head every single day. And in fact, they're leading the charge on some of those advanced technologies that are being used in the world. So there are some very, very good reasons that this transformation has to occur right now. Now first, a little bit about me. It's even scarier when it's 3 times larger than I am. This is me at 6 years old when I was young and wanted to conquer the world. I thought my personal involvement in government revolutions would go in a different direction. I was raised in a hyper-political household. My mom was involved in literally every election that there was. Nothing was too big, nothing was too small. I used to actually follow her and knock door to door. I would stuff envelopes. I was the house that had all those signs out front all the time. Whether it was the railroad commissioner or the school board, the tax assessor, we cared, and we were really involved in it. And so it actually caused me, when I was a kid, my career aspiration was to be the governor of Texas. And I thought that was the most wonderful job to have. Now, CMOs ended up being all right, that was good, but this would have been a great job. By the time that I got to college, though, and I did go to UT, my career certainly went in a different direction than that. And as the dean mentioned, I've had the opportunity to work for some terrific companies. What's common about a lot of these companies, especially later in my career, has been their dedication to purpose. If you're in marketing, you've probably heard a lot about the purpose revolution in the last several years, which is people will actually do better work, be better engaged, drive better output if they're aligned with a purpose and a mission. So I've had the opportunity to be at places like Dell that was literally figuring out how to transform accessibility to technology, or SunPower that was one of the world's leading solar energy companies helping us reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and address climate change. And these things, these purpose orientations have really driven my career and my career choice. So in the spring of 2017, I heard from this company that you guys have never heard of, because I had certainly never heard of it, and it's called CSTC. They're a government software company. What they do is they provide software to places like the city of Austin that help them run their revenue operations. So when you're doing a license or a permit or compliance or paying a fine, that's software at the core of it. That's what we do. Now, to be honest, when they contacted me, I didn't really pay much attention. I did do some research, and I realized that the sector was interesting, that the company seemed sound, but it didn't really tug. And then something amazing happened the very next day. On June 1st, 2017, the US government withdrew from the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was this global framework that 195 countries were a part of. And what it was a framework to figure out how to reduce reliance on fossil fuels and actively address climate change. It was a really, really big deal. The fact that we removed, or are intended to remove, from the Paris Agreement was huge. It sent shockwaves throughout the world. How can the US, which is actually one of the biggest contributors, decide that they're not going to be a part of this? So you can imagine, in my history, I'd been an energy executive. So it's a bummer when I think about what that's going to do to that industry. But even more so, as a human being and as a mom, I've got 18-year-old and 15-year-old boys. I just felt like, man, this is really bad, that we're actually going to knowingly allow something like this to happen. So it was really concerning. But then something even more compelling happened the very next day. Dozens of mayors came together, mayors at the local level, and what they had done was said, hey, wait a minute, we actually don't need a federal mandate and a construct to know what the right things are to do. And in many cases, these mayors are mayors of huge cities with millions of population, billions of dollars of economic output. They said, we're going to work together, we're going to band together, and we're going to do what we know is right around sustainability. So they vowed to work together towards the goals of the treaty, even though they weren't being directed by the federal government to do so. A few weeks later, the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Challenge launched. By this time, more than 230 cities that represented more than 70 million Americans had signed up to be part of this climate change initiative to address climate change. In fact, two of our fastest growing cities, and near and dear to our hearts, this week, Austin and San Antonio, were just finalized as winners of the American Cities Challenge. Huge deal. So each one of them, along with another 23 cities in the United States, are going to be receiving about $2.5 million of training and funding and resource to help advance their own goals towards climate change. So, aside from politics or climate change, what I came to appreciate was how much power can be driven at the local level. When you think about government, you typically think first about federal government. It's so big, it's so vast. Well, as a citizen, you actually really don't have that much interaction with the federal government. You're paying your taxes, you might be benefiting from national programs, but really what you see most is you see what's happening with your state government and your local government. And I thought it was really compelling how much power they had to drive positive change, and quite inspiring. So these inquiries from CSTC now had my attention. So wait a second, this is a software company that's actually going to be at the core of enabling these folks that are driving local and state governments to be really impactful. So I jumped at the chance. I'll quickly talk about what we do and then move off it. It's not a commercial, but it's more about context of the rest that I'm going to talk about. As I mentioned, what CSDC does is we provide software that helps governments modernize and deliver critical services, especially around permitting and licensing and code compliance. And we operate right at the heart of state and local. We help them actually generate revenue. And we provide services that you and I need to build homes, to start businesses, to get professional licenses. So it's a really important part and a nerve center of what every city has. So this was terrific because it enabled me to figure out how I was going to drive and impact and drive change, even if I was never going to be the governor of Texas. So some things you might know or might not know about government and technology. It is an enormous industry. Governments rely on tech to do things that we kind of take for granted. Turning your lights on at home, knowing that your water's safe to drink, having roads to travel on, knowing that you've got confidence around public and personal safety. Governments rely on technology to do all of those things for us. The state and local government, just state and local government alone, is enormous. So eRepublik, which is one of the largest data analyst firms in government technology, estimates that in 2018, the US spent $103 billion on IT, just in the state and local sectors. And government CIOs are facing a pretty big challenge today because they've got to modernize and provide citizens with experiences every bit as good or even better than what they receive in the private sector. When I first started with CSDC, one of our CIOs said something that was pretty profound to me. He said, I'm not competing with other cities or towns when it comes to providing great citizen services. I'm competing with Amazon and Google. Because you and I aren't sitting here and making a decision, are we going to live in Round Rock or Austin based on how easy it is to pay property taxes, but we certainly are going to grumble if we can't have an experience as good as Google, Facebook, or Amazon when we're actually executing those things. Ask any local or state CIO about tech priorities, and you're going to hear a lot about smart technologies. State and local government, of this $103 billion, $12 billion of it was actually dedicated to smart city technology, and that's growing 17% year over year. Governments are actually the ones that are leading the charge on things in the Internet of Things space, the IoT. What this is the rapidly growing network of connected objects that collect data, communicate across them, and help us actually figure out how to optimize everything that's going on in a city. Anything from your home thermostat to the street light in front of your house to air quality sensors, they can all be connected, and that's where the IoT revolution is really happening. 81% of cities are planning their investments with IoT in mind. So when they're putting together their annual city budgets, this is getting a big chunk of their attention. And in fact, IoT adoption rates in cities across the United States, not just the leading ones, I'm talking about all of them, could reach 80% by 2025. So this is right in front of us in terms of the spend, the capability, and the impact that it's going to have on all of our lives. This isn't, though, just about government spend and you and I having some personal citizen impact. Imagine the ecosystem that's going to be built around this. So if you're a technology company like a Cisco or an IBM, a GE or a Dell, you're going to be in an accelerated growth phase as well. All of those companies have got enormous IoT practices that are growing like gangbusters. Now, investors are paying a lot of attention to this space. The publication Government Technology publishes something called the GovTech 100 every year. And this is the top 100 companies that they think are making a big difference in state and local governments. These 100 companies, and this was just released for 2019 last week, these 100 companies on the GovTech list, of which CSDC is one, collectively raised $358 million of investment just last year. 100 companies, $358 million. This collection of companies, this 100, has received $2.9 billion of investment since their inception dates. So why so much? Why is this having such an investment boom? Well, the reason is because investors see this market as having huge potential. It's somewhat impervious to traditional economic cycles. The city of Austin can't decide that it's not going to issue building permits anymore. The city of Austin can't decide that it's not going to license doctors and nurses or beauticians. So this doesn't have the same impact that traditional supply and demand and economics might have. Investors are really interested in that, and the returns that they're seeing are extraordinary right now. And the fact is, not only do these services have to continue happening, but the technology available and citizen expectations are all coming together to drive kind of a perfect wave of growth. So we all have these things in our pockets, and as a result, we expect immediate access to everything, right? We want to know everything right this moment, whether it's really complex banking data or something that's happening on the news or a sports score or what the temperature is in our kitchen at home. And we expect this with banking and retail and social connections. Well, we expect the same thing when we're interacting with the government. It doesn't matter if you're trying to pay a utility bill, check on the status of a permit that you're building, license a business, or pay a traffic fine. We want to do it through these mobile devices. We expect the process to be as easy as buying something on Amazon or liking something on Facebook. You know, right now, any one of you guys could open up the Instacart app, and between now and when I even sit down a couple of minutes from now, you could have ordered your evening groceries, you could have a car dispatched, it would be delivered to your house by the time that you actually leave this facility in the next hour. Can you imagine the different set of expectations that we have for going to the DMV? When we go to the DMV, like, do you guys take a day off work? We do not plan that it's going to be easy and effective and seamless. Well, citizens now are starting to demand that because it's like, well, hey, wait a minute. If I can figure out how to get groceries deployed in 15 minutes, why can't I relicense something where you actually have the data in that computer already? So these challenges and the opportunities that government face, they're all common at the core. What they've got to try to do is figure out how they're going to increase economic opportunity, preserve our public safety, and attract population growth. You know, interestingly, a lot of people think that cities don't really compete because it's not like market share. Somebody doesn't have to go up for somebody else to go down. But cities, in fact, do compete, just in a very different way. They're competing to be great. They want to be the best at attracting economic development. They want to be the best at providing citizen services. They want to be the best at creating outstanding quality of life. Think about when we actually look and we see our city on the top of the most livable list, the best place to start businesses, the best place to raise families. That's what best looks like. Now, these challenges for these cities, Monet reinforced again how much the population is exploding in many of them. 60% of the world's population will live in big cities by the year 2050, which is putting increased pressure on the infrastructures that these cities have got to deliver. And in fact, in just 1 year, Austin will have 1 million residents inside of the city limits here, making us one of only 11 cities in the United States that are greater than the $1 million barrier, or million citizen barrier. So the demands, if you're the mayor of this city, if you're sitting on the city council, you're sitting there and thinking, how am I going to make sure that that is a great experience for businesses, for citizens that live here? So technology is what enables these cities to compete, because what they can do is they can compete for growth to build their virtuous cycles. Like any private sector CIO, these CIOs need the same thing. They need technology that's accessible, that's scalable, that's affordable, that's enterprise grade and enterprise ready. That's why governments are driving this revolution that I'm talking about. So the race to build these smart communities is on, these IoT-fueled communities. So making a community smart sounds terrific, but what does it really mean? I'm going to read you the technical definition. It's a city that uses information and communication technologies to enhance the quality and performance of urban services, such as energy, transportation, and utilities, in order to reduce resource consumption, waste, and overall costs, while improving citizen quality of life. Sounds cool. We'd all like to live in a city that's smart, right? In short, it's using this terrific technology that governments are leading in deployment on in ways that can have a measurable impact on all the things that they're trying to do. So as I mentioned, IoT is one of the core investment areas. One of the biggest investments communities are making are the deployment of these sensors, these IoT sensors, from street and traffic lights to air and water sensors to roadways. The cost of sensors is low and becoming more affordable. By 2020, the average cost of one of these little sensors is going to be just 38 cents, which is a 75% reduction in the last 10 years. That drop in cost is obviously making it more affordable for more cities to deploy them. Gartner estimates that there will be over 20 billion IoT devices in use next year. Now, these devices produce an enormous amount of data about how citizens are interacting with that infrastructure and how that infrastructure is working. To improve our quality of life, it's not just enough to go plug a lot of sensors in. We've got to figure out how to take that data, analyze it, and action it. That's why you're also going to see a boom in government-fueled artificial intelligence spending. They cannot possibly keep up with all the data that's being created by these sensors with the tools and analytics approaches that we have today. So let me step out of the theoretical and talk about what a smart traffic city light would be. You can put an IoT device with a camera into this traffic light, and immediately you've got a lot of data around traffic flows, wait times, backups, and more. But the traffic light isn't smart just because you put the device in it. We've got to figure out how to take all of that data, analyze, spot patterns, and make smart adjustments accordingly. And to do this, that's why AI is going to be important. But simply finding patterns isn't all we need either. We've actually got to figure out how to tune the system around what we're learning real time. We've got to figure out how to spot patterns instantly and make real-time changes to that signal timing in the light. Then the real transformation comes, because things actually start operating more intelligently around you. When the transformation comes around something like a stoplight, backups are anticipated and then avoided. Traffic flows can be rerouted real time when there's an accident. Maintenance can be planned when they know the roads are actually declining in terms of usage. This sort of transformation can be really significant, not just from a citizen standpoint, but for the economy. You know, in Austin, on average, we spend a little bit under 30 minutes getting to work every day. That's better than most cities, but frankly, that is 6,000 days of work time commuting every single day for all of us. Imagine if we could deploy that time and put it back into growing the economy and innovating. Now, it doesn't stop there. With a smart traffic system, not only do we get to move faster and not have delays, we can also help emergency systems get to the right place faster and save more lives. When cars idle less and spend less time on the roads, we're protecting our air quality and our public health. When traffic commute times are low, businesses are more interested in coming here. All of these things lead back to the core things that cities want to advance, which is economic development, citizen safety, and quality of life. So there's 4 foundation principles that I'll talk you through about what a smart community looks like and what cities have to do and states have to do to get there. First, a community has got to digitize all the data that they've got, and they've got vast amounts of data, legacy systems and current systems. Second, a smart community relies on IoT, what we just talked about, to generate real-time data about infrastructure. So they've got to make sure that they're deploying this relatively inexpensive technology across all of the important infrastructure elements in their city. The third is they've got to figure out what to do with all of this data and figure out how to make sure that they're actually analyzing and actioning all of it. Data can become a stumbling block, though. So think about this. IDC estimates there are about 33 zettabytes of data in the world today. To illustrate how much that is, it would take about 53 million years of streaming HD video on Netflix to consume that much data. And The Fabulous Mrs. Maisel is good, but she's not that good. That's a lot of time. And we're adding to that data every minute, every hour, every day. 33 zettabytes today. It's expected that in the next 5 years, that data load is going to increase by 5 times. So there's this tremendous need and burgeoning opportunity around data analytics systems and AI in order to support this. There's only one way that cities can actually analyze, and it's got to be through the help of machines and machine learning. The fourth principle is that security and transparency have to be paramount. You've read and probably heard a lot about the facial recognition cameras that some countries are piloting. Having sensors on cameras on every street lamp is a good idea for public safety, but it can actually be a pretty big inhibitor to privacy. And so there's already a significant amount of data out there. Suspicions among citizens are very high. So what the government needs to make sure that they do are build systems with robust security in mind to prevent access by bad actors and make sure they're transparent about how all of that data is being used and it's impacting us. So anyway, the smartest answer to building these communities isn't in just getting the techiest solutions. It's in careful planning and getting all the data, real-time data creation through the use of IoT, making sure you're using AI to access and analyze this data, and making sure paramount that you're protecting data with security and committing to your citizens what it is that you're doing with them. Now, when communities make the choice to follow these principles, some pretty amazing things can happen in terms of how they can improve lives. You know, just over 3 months ago, after a week of torrential rains, we experienced what was termed historic flooding here in Central Texas. It's estimated that the lakes took in more water in that 1 week than the entire city of Austin can use in 4 years. And historic was too clinical of a term for it. Lake Travis reached 700 feet. It was over 130% full. 8 floodgates were opened on the Mansfield Dam. In addition to flooding around the lake, the release of fast-moving waters added to flash flood dangers throughout the region. In mid-October, the rains created some really big concerns for us that our dam system was going to fail, and worries about that catastrophe quickly grew. Ultimately, 18 counties were declared disaster areas, and damage estimates are still being calculated, but they're in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Tragically, 2 people were killed, hundreds of buildings, many of them homes, were damaged, and countless businesses are still rebuilding. Now, the Lower Colorado River Authority is the dedicated team that actually did a terrific job leading crisis response to situations like that. They're also the ones that keep us safe and supplied with drinking water. They manage nearly 600 miles of the river, the entire Highland Lake system, all the dams, 18,000 square miles of watershed. That's about the size of Massachusetts and Maryland combined that they manage, all that land mass, just one state agency. And in October, I think we can all agree that their response was just outstanding. Now, they do a lot with technology already. We get flood alerts with calls, texts, and emails and social media. Today, LCRA is doing all of this with only 300 IoT sensors. 300 covering a watershed area larger than 2 states. So I want you to imagine for a moment that it's January 2024 or 2022 or 2020. We could do it now because their costs are so inexpensive. What's possible? Let's imagine that LCRA has put hundreds of thousands or thousands of inexpensive IoT sensors into the region. Every single creek flowing into the Colorado is being monitored. Every spot on each of the Highland Lakes is being measured. Real-time data about rainfall everywhere in the watershed is collected. Beyond just knowing where all the low water crossings are, they're actually seeing them and evaluating them real time. These terabytes of data that the system is generating is being analyzed real time. They're compared to historic and current models. The moment that property and life need protection, they can instantly respond. And in this smart environment, think about actually what this would look like the next time a rain bomb hits. Before the disaster even strikes, AI can continually be integrating and mining and actualizing the data from satellites, historical records, sensor networks, social media, and combining all that with real-time monitoring so that response plans are continually updated. Evacuation areas are geo-targeted at the house-by-house level. Warnings can be issued earlier, allowing people more time to safely evacuate. Traffic flow on these routes is instantly rerouted. Oftentimes in a disaster, some of the biggest challenges are getting people actually out of the environment, out of the place where it's happening. Evacuees can efficiently move out of harm's way. It stops others from entering danger zones, and it keeps roadways open for emergency services. These emergency services and first responders know exactly where they're needed and can use real-time routing to find the quickest and most effective way to get there. The health histories of evacuees and the injured are linked to hospitals and trauma centers, dramatically improving post-disaster care and saving lives. This is just one example in one very small region in the United States. Imagine this capability being deployed when wildfires strike in the West, when the next tsunami threatens communities around the Pacific or the Indian Oceans, when volcanoes erupt. Lives, treasured belongings, livelihoods, and our way of life will be saved, all because of great technology being deployed by leading government companies. So building smart communities has the potential to also unleash tremendous economic growth. I'll quickly just talk about Austin. Austin previously had used non-digitized systems to process permits. And so the city workers were doing a terrific job, the best that they could do. They were processing about 38,000 permits per year. Now that their processes are digitized and learning from optimization about how to make them more efficient, they're producing 127,000 permits per year. 4 times as great. That's $90 million in city revenue that's being generated just because we're getting smarter about deploying technology. And it's also providing a better output for you and me. We can build additions to our houses faster. We can get businesses licensed faster. We can get quicker turnaround on professional licenses. So it's doing the citizens good, it's creating revenue, it's lowering our tax base when they're deploying this revenue back into the city. It's a win all around for all of us. We can expect that smart communities are going to encourage the development of entirely new parts of the business industry that we haven't even considered. We talked a little bit about AI. We talked a little bit about the hardware required. Think about the communications infrastructure required. This is going to cause investment in all of the periphery cases around what the government is actually doing themselves and providing real value and economic growth. There's also going to be terrific value in the data that will be generated from all these systems that will help us figure out how to develop better, develop faster, develop smarter, can help us identify emerging opportunities for differentiation, can help us figure out the next thing that we need to think about for citizen safety. So the potential of technology is vast. It's going to help us improve quality of lives, create economic development. It's going to help us be better prepared and better active during real natural disasters. Whether you're a citizen or a business leader or somebody that's working in government or an investor, I think that you can see this is going to impact you significantly over the course of the next several years as smart cities really start to take hold. And it's thrilling that governments are actually on the leading edge of that innovation, because I think you'll agree with this innovation cycle, what we used to say, which is good enough for government, again, they're turning on their heads, and what our governments are demanding is it great enough for government so that they can provide you what they need, they can provide economic growth, and we can create a better world together. Thank you very much.
Well, I don't know, I'm excited that we're making investments in entrepreneurship and machine learning and AI and partnerships with computer science and a long list of other things here at McCombs, because our students need that in order to be gainfully employed by you and to change the world, which is what we do here. Our final speaker before our Q&A is Mark Shen. Mark is also an alumni of the business school. He is the president of St. Louis Children's Hospital. Prior to that role, he was with Ascension Health in multiple leadership roles, including the president of Dell Children's Medical Center, Dell Children's Health, and Dell Children's Health from 2013 to 2017. In 2017, he was asked to serve as CEO of the Ascension Texas Accountable Care Network and as Senior Vice President of Network Development at Ascension Texas. He initiated and developed statewide partnership and acquisition opportunities across pediatric and adult delivery systems and built a clinically integrated network of more than 2,600 providers covering 170,000 lives in risk-based contracts across Medicare commercial payers in Central Texas. He also served as interim chair of pediatrics here at the Dell Medical School. He holds a bachelor's degree from Stanford, a medical degree from UT Southwestern Medical School, and as I mentioned, he's one of our MBA grads. Mark, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Okay, well, it's wonderful to be here and to see so many executive MBAs in the audience. I will tell you, you don't know how hard it was to walk uphill through the snow and then go into that dungeon at the AT&T Center with no windows. So you have it great here in this new facility. I am really jealous though, because I got to watch the construction, the huge pit in the ground, and then the scaffolding in the building. So I'm happy that you're here, and you should be much more successful than I am with this new facility. Okay, so I'm going to talk about healthcare. We will eventually come back to St. Louis Children's Hospital, but I'm going to start with I'm going to repurpose a talk that I had to give when I was invited to the Netherlands in the fall. And they put on a World Congress of Healthcare, invited countries from all over the world. This is in The Hague at their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It sort of looked like, it felt like we were in the UN. And you had Ukraine, Brazil, China, India, Kenya, and many EU countries, but from all over the world. And like literally a week before I was supposed to go, one of the organizers said, hey, would you mind giving a presentation, a talk, just 15, 20 minutes on the US healthcare system? I thought, sure, I can try to condense that into 15 minutes. But that's what I'm going to try to take you through. So I'm a pediatrician by background and obviously now in healthcare administration. And healthcare is fairly complex. If you are like most people and most companies, you don't know about healthcare costs in your company unless you are either in HR or you're the CFO. And I would argue that even then, most of your companies don't really understand why your healthcare expenses are going up every year. And you partner with payers to try to really work on that, but it's complex. And so we'll walk through a little bit of the current narrative around that in this country. By the way, so I won't really get to tell you about healthcare in the Netherlands. If you haven't been, just two quick things. One, everybody looks fit, okay? And two, everybody looks fit because everybody rides a bicycle to work. It's pretty amazing. Apparently, by the time I think you're 9, you have to have taken the equivalent of like a driver's license test here in the United States, but on a bike. because they expect that all of your kids, by the time they're 9, are biking to school on their own. And it's, crossing the street is an experience, because I would literally sit there and then almost get wiped out by a bike because there's a bike lane everywhere. So you have to look every time, you have to look both ways because you might be in a bike lane, and then you get to the street and you have to look both ways as well. Okay, so let's start with how healthcare is paid for or funded in this country. So if you are a patient here in the middle, there are a variety of ways in which sort of dollars flow, and dollars are in green here. You work for an employer, and this is most of you in the room, and you get paid nominally by your employer. And the employer then typically sends money to an insurance company to cover your healthcare costs. And it's the insurance companies that are largely paying, me as a doctor or my hospital or the clinic for care. Now, for the largely, if you're above a certain age or if you make below a certain income threshold, there's also the government up top, and we all pay taxes. And the government also accounts for, the government is essentially the largest insurance company in this country. CMS, the Center for Medicare Medicaid Services. There's a couple other sort of dollar streams in here. You can, of course, also go out and find care on your own and pay cash, or you can also get your own insurance through the individual exchange marketplace. But that's sort of the basics of how it works, and hopefully most of you are familiar with that. Although I'll admit that even as somebody that's sort of in this, it is still very confusing once a year in November where I get, an email from my company. It says open enrollment and you have, 3 weeks, and I look at the options and I really don't I'll be honest, I really don't understand a lot of the options. There's a cheaper one and I sort of go with the cheaper one, and then I don't know what that means like midway through the year if I hurt my foot or something and have to figure out where to go. So we are not very consumer-centric in terms of helping you understand how to find value in your system. So before I went to the Netherlands, I asked my team here at Ascension, Texas, I said, well, what do you guys think I should tell, all of these other countries about the US healthcare system? And this was the unanimous response. You gotta tell them it's broken, okay? And again, so this is a slide that I'm showing a room full of people from around the world. I will say that I did gain an appreciation that there are many shared challenges across the world when it comes to healthcare. There's this growing and aging population that seems to account for more and more healthcare costs. People from India and Kenya were saying, well, our challenge is how do we even insure 500 million people in our area? So there are many similarities. How do you leverage technology? Again, similar to what Aaron was saying. Shared challenges across, but again, now we're going to dive into a little bit of why maybe the US sort of stands out a little bit. We're going to look at US healthcare by the numbers. And the US has, this is an easy one, the US has the most expensive healthcare system in the world, arguably, and you look at sort of comparative countries up here, and again, they really stand out in terms of per capita healthcare expenditures. If you look at healthcare spending as a percentage of GDP, again, you see this growth that really outpaces similar countries listed over there on the right. And, as you look at this, I would say that nothing is, the US healthcare spending is sort of like the Kansas City Chiefs offense. Nothing has been able to stop it in a long, long time, okay? So I'd ask you to sort of, again, think about that because, again, somebody in your companies is having to look at this at the end of the year, and this is how they're making decisions in general. Wow, that keeps going up every year. Let's figure out how we shift more costs to the employees in terms of high deductible plans, et cetera. I had 2 girls here that were born here in Austin. They were both born at Seton Medical Center, Austin. My first child was free. My second child cost $2,000. If I had another child today, my wife won't have any of that. That child would probably be much more expensive these days. So again, this is a problem for all of your companies. We'll get a little bit to what sort of the industry looks like. but we really haven't figured out how to address some of these issues. Okay, so more rankings, just to make you feel good about your country as compared to others. This is sort of overall, quality, efficiency, equity. So it's many things altogether, but you can see that we do very poorly compared to other countries in terms of overall health rankings. And this is things like life expectancy. Okay. There are specific sort of medical quality indicators in this, but just simple life expectancy as well. There is some discussion that perhaps why this discrepancy exists is related to the amount that we spend on social services as opposed to sort of medical care, if you will. And you can see that we do not spend as a country as much as some of these other countries, and there may be some correlation there. This is just another way to look at it. If you look at healthcare spending in light blue and social care spending in the darker blue, you look at the US again, sort of stands out in terms of the relative amounts of spending on each of those. And you will hear some of this if you ever hear the phrase social determinants of health. We now have a much greater understanding that a lot of health in this country is determined by social factors and less your access to medical care and the quality of that medical care. And that makes sense if you look at, for example, the epidemic of obesity and related conditions such as diabetes. Those have strong links to sort of social and behavioral dynamics that then impact health. Here is another sort of common phrase in healthcare, which is that there's a ton of waste in the system. Okay, and so there's lots of different categories here. Fraud and abuse is obviously concerning, but unnecessary care. So, are we delivering too much care that isn't needed? And that's a common sort of issue these days, overuse that's talked about in medicine. It was actually one of my academic areas of interest, because I could never understand how, different doctors, I could have 10 different partners and we'd all practice differently. Well, at some level, there's a lot of waste in the system. If I'm turning over care to my partner and they are doing something, that feels very different from what I was doing the day before. Another graph in terms of actual life expectancy, I sort of mentioned this earlier, versus health expenditures. You see where the US is compared to other countries with, if you look at both life expectancy and expenditures. So again, we're not getting a return on our dollar. Again, this is just another way to look at it. If you look at overall health system performance relative to spending, again, we're spending the most, and we're not getting that return in terms of health system performance. And this is the industry that we're talking about, a $3 trillion industry today. And you can look at sort of the distribution of this. Most of it is in hospital and physician expenditures. There's also an argument that we simply pay more for doctors and hospitals in this country relative to other countries. And so that's a huge problem as well. We won't get into all of that. But again, all of these are big industries because this is a $3 trillion industry. And again, there hasn't been any real slowdown in the growth of spending here. So Dell Medical School is one of the most innovative medical schools in this country today. And they are trying to rethink health. Again, tackling at some level all of those problems that I just talked about. A variety of approaches here, and there really are some leading thinkers on this campus today thinking about how do we pay for value. That's very tricky. I just told you that 10 doctors in one group might all do something slightly differently when it comes to pneumonia. Well, how is it that in 2019 we don't know how to determine which of those doctors is delivering the best value to you and your companies that are paying for this care? That, in part, is a problem with the medical profession, but again, it's also a problem because we haven't really looked at this in the past. Design thinking, is also a wonderful approach. How do we make this, again, in line with what Aaron was talking about, how do we begin to compete with, and Amazon is going to compete with us, how do we begin to compete with the Amazons and the Googles in terms of this consumer-centric experience that they are delivering? If you've ever been sick, you know that our experience here is fairly fragmented in healthcare, and that certainly leads to inefficiencies and poor outcomes. And I'll leave you with two quick stories. You know, my niche, my chosen niche now, is the world of children's hospitals. And I'm going to talk to you about Jack and Fiona, because I think they illustrate not only the great potential of our system, but also some of the challenges. So Jack and Fiona were treated at St. Louis Children's Hospital. Jack here on your left, at 6 months, got a heart and lung transplant. He was born with a heart condition where his heart didn't function properly, and he is, by many, many years, the youngest known survivor of a dual heart and lung transplant, and is doing very well now, almost a year after transplant. So just think about both sort of that first, if you will, that world's first, and how expensive that care is. And similarly, Fiona is the oldest known survivor. She has two conditions. One might be sort of obvious, Down syndrome, which is relatively common, can be associated with many other life-limiting conditions, but many children with Down syndrome have long, healthy lives. But she also has whole prosencephaly, which is a brain malformation, again, sort of a syndrome, which is associated with many other very life-limiting conditions. And again, I think she's maybe 12, is the oldest known survivor by a good amount. And so here we have two beautiful and wonderful children who are a testament to what we are able to do in this country, which is we probably provide the best life-saving care in the world at a very high cost. And I'm not sure that we are ready to really think through how we make determinations when, at least in the pediatric space, these are sort of, in large part, what is driving the cost of healthcare higher. I'm not sure that we're ready to think about how we handle sort of this kind of cost. Now, I will say that there's still lots of opportunity on the adult side when you have lots of chronic diseases related to heart attacks, diabetes, hypertension, where if you better manage the disease, you can actually decrease hospitalizations and be much more efficient. But in the pediatric world, we're only getting better at prolonging the lives of kids with very complex and rare medical conditions. And now we have the ability, this is one thing that we're known for in St. Louis, the ability to do genomics, which is to sequence somebody's entire DNA when they have some problems in the NICU, and we're identifying conditions and have published several papers on conditions that have never been described before, and now we have sort of the gene answer, but we don't know what to do with that. Okay, so we're sort of entering a new era. And again, that's sort of the complexity of my world. I feel strongly about it because I believe that children's hospitals and children's systems have really been at the cutting edge in this country, the cutting edge of delivering the best possible care, but the value determination gets a little bit more complicated in my space. Okay, so thank you.
I'm going to invite you guys to come up. And have you got questions for us, Christine?
Yes, they're at the podium.
They're already there. I've got, if you have additional ones.
I'll collect them.
Okay. Christine is picking up questions. I've got some questions for you to get going. First of all, thank you very much. Mark, you've got me energized about our relationship with DelMed.
Yeah.
And the new MS program and all the things we're doing there as well. And some of you may know that DelMed has a class of 50 med students every year that they bring in, and roughly a third of them are taking their third year to get an MBA with us along the way. So they're going to be bringing some business to healthcare in the future, and we're quite excited about that. I've got a question, sort of basic economy question. All right? How does this affect you, and what insights do you think you can bring to this? So in the fourth quarter, we saw a lot of market volatility. Things going up and down every day, large numbers. In the stock market, flattening yield curve. We saw, but our economy seems to be strong. I mean, you provided a tremendous number of very strong indicators. We've got above trend GDP growth, an unemployment rate that's particularly low, inflation is low. Is there a recession on the way? Is the market telling us something that these other indicators aren't?
I'm not predicting a recession. No, I'll say though that looking forward, there are some concerns or these clouds, not just for Texas, but for the national economy as well. So yes, we had a really great growth, both in terms of GDP and employment growth this last year. But that is some of the effect, some of the reason for that was the tax cut, which was supposed to get us more investment, business investment, and also consumer spending. And we did see a lot of consumer spending. Consumer spending was really strong last year. Business investment, not as much, but going into 2019, we think some of that has now dissipated. So we're not going to get as big of a kick from the tax cuts as we did last year. The global economy is slowing, and that is quite important for the US. So that's another sort of concern. The other is, bad trade policy is bad for the whole world. And so it's sort of disrupting supply chains, and that is not good for businesses, not good for business costs. So that's another concern. What else? Well, tight labor market. I mean, you have to have people to work if you want to grow the economy. And if there's nobody else coming in, then that's also a problem. So there are some of the concerns that maybe the growth may not be as fast this year as it was last year for the national economy.
Okay. Are you, Mark, Aaron, are you seeing some of these challenges? You're not importing steel pipes, but...
Not as much, because as I mentioned, I think government has this uniqueness around being almost impervious to traditional economic cycles, because cities can't choose to not run. We are seeing increases in costs, though, because the labor market is becoming more expensive, especially in terms of software development. We're certainly seeing medical costs are increasing year over year. We're seeing that demands on security and infrastructure around cybersecurity and risk, we spend more money making sure that our products have that capability. So our costs are going up, but demand is staying relatively strong and increasing year over year.
Yeah, so in the healthcare sector, we have an aging population that's increasing sort of cost and demand, and then, our ability to sort of generate our own demand with our own scientific discoveries, if you will. So what I don't think we'll feel any, or I don't think we're seeing anything that might be a sign of a recession, but I will say as soon as a recession hits, then we see big differences in how healthcare is paid for, back to that early graph, which then has significant impact down the line.
You mentioned the tax cut. When I read the New York Times, I get one story about the tax cut. When I read the Wall Street Journal, I get another story about the tax cut. What are you seeing at the Fed if you were to predict sort of the overall, the longer term impact of this cut?
I mean, there are a lot of studies out there, as you say. There was one, and I can't remember the numbers, I have to say, but I think in the long run, it's supposed to be pretty neutral, is what I remember. Big short-term impact, and then it sort of dwindles as you go out.
Right. Is there any advanced data that are coming your way as to the success? A lot of claims were made about what would happen or what wouldn't happen, the veracity of those claims.
We don't see any advanced data.
Okay, well.
No, but just looking at last year's data, I mean, it was very strong. GDP growth was quite strong. Consumer spending was up, I think, maybe 4% or something, really, really high. But the models are saying it's going to dissipate as we go forward, and that's the expectation that the GDP growth this year may be 2 or 2.5 max or something like that. So the models the models are saying it's going to slow, and we'll see this year the data. We'll have to look at the data and see if we were right or not.
We'll have to bring you back next year to find out what happened. This is economist's job for life.
There's a job always for us.
Exactly. Are you seeing effects of the tax cut in your businesses?
No, not directly.
Not hitting you? All right. We've got I have lots more questions, but some of yours now. You wrote very small, and I don't have my glasses, but All right, here's one. Can you describe the effect, this would be for anyone on the panel, but I think Erin is uniquely positioned, describe the effect of blockchain technology on the GovTech space?
That's actually one of the areas, in addition to AI, that's going to be exploding, because blockchain is really effective when you've got large amounts of data that are publicly accessible. And so many cities are actually starting to do blockchain pilots right now. And we envision that this could actually really revolutionize lots of things. Think about things like whether or not you're able to license a business and all the data that you can have around that and how it can be validated. Think about employers and employer verification, knowing that you've actually got lots of data points that could be contributed to a single person. Information about pieces of property that could be contributed and maintained by multiple data sources. And so it has the opportunity, when the government is in the business of managing, people and things and licenses and stuff, to really revolutionize how strong that data is, how broadly accessible that data is, and how it's also confirmed that it's high fidelity to be used for really smart strategies. So it's going to be a big deal. You'll see a lot of spending in that going forward from the different government agencies.
Mark, this one's for you. How are health expenditures measured? Is it the amount, when we talk about health expenditures, are we talking about what hospitals bill? Is it what insurance companies pay? Does it go well beyond that? How would you define?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to look at this is really what the insurance companies and the government, again, think of the government as an insurance company, are paying for healthcare. And again, one thing to keep in mind, and I'll draw my experience here. So when Eric mentioned in the introduction that I ran this Ascension Texas Accountable Care Network, this was really a way to partner with employers, because keep in mind that for most of your companies, most likely your company is on the hook for all of the healthcare expenses of its employees by and large. So we actually partnered with Austin Independent School District, and at one point I was the medical director for the school district, and I would go to this school health meeting. Again, I wasn't wearing my sort of the health system partnership hat, but I would see staff from the school, the two people, again, that were in HR that seemed to understand this, say, teachers, they would talk to the teachers, say, we spent $90 million last year on healthcare for our teachers, and it's projected to be $100 million this year. And if you have kids, my girls are currently in an AISD school still. I commute to St. Louis right now until the end of the school year. But if you know anything about the AISD school district, $10 million is a lot of money. And I think my wife told me that there are rumors of cutting teachers and staff and closing schools and all these kinds of things. So I just want you to think about the impact of $10 million for the AISD school district. And so we worked with AISD to try to reduce that sort of growth curve, if you will, in spending through a variety of different mechanisms that I won't go into. But I'd say the really palpable way to think about healthcare spending is to, again, talk to your CFO or the person in HR that oversees this and see it from their lens, because that's really how it impacts you, I think, at the end of the day.
Mark, here's another one for you, and it's got some interesting twists to it. How much healthcare costs in the US, how much does it have to do with the number of people being treated versus other countries? And how does the influx of people from other nations coming to the US impact the cost of healthcare?
Yeah, I think in general, that's probably a minimal piece of this. If you go back to the very first sort of data slide that I showed, it was per capita expenditures. And again, our per capita expenditures still far outpace similar countries. And I would say that in general, although, yes, even here at Dell Children's, we would get children that could not get access to care in their country and would sort of land on our doorstep. We actually have policies for that internally to decide sort of how much charity care we can afford to give out year over year. So I would say people sort of coming into this country and needing access to, again, our very, very sort of high technology and very expensive medical care, there are guardrails built in so that that doesn't impact what you're seeing. And by the way, most of the charity care that's delivered is to, for example, the local homeless here in town that don't have access to medical insurance.
All right. This will be our last one, because we've we're running out of time, but Mene, Midland Permian has been resilient through the oil, this oil crash, the volatility in oil. Is this sustainable with the 2019 outlook? And what would the impact of if this bubble or if this situation were to burst to end, would you forecast?
So, right, they did, and Midland, all the problems that we have in terms of tight labor markets, they have it in spades. So, a very tight labor market. They can't find people, and aside from the oil patch, like if you go to a hotel in Midland, it's probably more expensive than the AT&T Center right next door. So everything is really very expensive. So I think if things just calm down a little bit, maybe they won't go into recession or anything like that, but it'll be cheaper, costs will be a little bit lower, and there'll be a little bit, what can I say, well, housing prices in Midland are very high. Everything is at extremely high levels in terms of cost. So that will all come down and it'll be alleviated a little bit. So in that sense, they will breathe easier, let's put it that way, if oil prices stay a little bit lower than they were last year. But there is a level difference in terms of whether the price is 60, it's 40, or it's 30. So if price is at 30 and they're sustained, Midland will go into recession or Midland will lose jobs. But 45, for example, again, people are saying some of these businesses will go into bankruptcy. So not everybody will be able to handle a $45 oil price. $50, I showed you the break-evens, it's probably in better shape. So sustainability depends on the oil price. A very low oil price, it's not sustainable. 50 middling oil prices, 50, 55, sustainable, and maybe some relief from Midland because they are so hot right now. So it depends. It's always based on that oil price, is what I would say.
Any chance we're going to see 80?
Well, the Saudis said they were going to cut, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that they were really going to cut and push the price up to 80. There are a lot of, the geopolitics is very complicated. We have a president who's putting a lot of pressure on the Saudis to keep the prices at a sort of a lower level. The agreement that they had with Russia and with the rest of non-OPEC nations, that agreement is not as tight as it was a couple of years ago. So I would say that the risks are more to the downside than to the upside because it's harder to keep that pact together, I think, these days.
Well, with that, I want to thank you that no government shutdown stopped you from speaking, stopped you from traveling. You got here, we're able to engage in some very interesting conversation across a wide range of economic topics. Thank you all for coming. I hope we'll see you here for other events and forecasts in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.